Welcome to another episode of the Limitless Live Podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Smith. And if you have not done so, hit that subscribe button so that you never miss another podcast. And if you love this podcast and you want some more tips and tricks on how to improve yourself, go ahead and subscribe to my YouTube channel. There are a ton of instructional videos there. You can find the links down below. However, my friends, today our guest is Dennis Morolda.
What's up, dude? Love the vibe there, man. I just the first time we spoke today, right? And already feel like I've known you for quite some time, and the energy that you bring, it's contagious. Good to see you. Thanks for having me, man.
I very much appreciate that. I really try to bring the presence, try to bring energy, and it is genuine good vibes. It's like the childlike excitement that I just feel on the inside. I just try to bring it out there, and I think it's good. It's good vibes.
And you even did you're like Dennis Morolda. It's like when you're young and you're playing basketball in the driveway and you make that shot and you emulate the crowd noise by that.
Exactly.
Yeah, that was good. That was the first time I had been introduced on a podcast like that. So thank you.
I think one day I'll probably get like a stream deck or something, and then I'll press the button where it'll actually be a cheers. I think that would be really freaking cool. I just thought of that now.
Dude, take it to the next level, man.
Yeah,
man. How about you do it live in front of an audience, right? You do it live in front of an audience and you actually have the crowd noise going crazy for the limitless life.
That'd be sweet for sure. So my friend, going for a pretty decent question that I like to start with. How is it that you impact the lives of the people around you?
Wow, it's a hard hitter to start, dude. How is it that I impact the lives of the people around me? I think it is selflessness. It is like the combination of strength and vulnerability. And we could talk about, just in my opinion, around masculinity, it's that sweet spot of strength and vulnerability. So I believe like how I show up for my people in my world and anyone that follows along with what we're doing here in Building Men it's that balance of being the provider, the strong stoic figure, the one that can handle the difficult situations, the one that will show up, says what he's going to do and does it. And then also the vulnerability piece, where I know I'm a fallible human being. I know I've made mistakes. I know that I struggle at times in my own life, and I'm not scared to talk about those things as well. And people that know me know that, like, I will show up for them 100%. I am there. And especially the young men that I work with, I mean, that's my mantra. I'm like, I am there for you. And that's it. That's how I show up.
That's pretty sweet. I like that you said strength and vulnerability. Bedros Keuilian, kind of like, I call him my mental mentor. I got to meet him.
Yeah.
That was pretty cool, but he's still my mental mentor. And something I stole from him that I really liked for the idea of masculinity is being a savage servant.
Yep.
So being of service, being savage when it's necessary, but being a servant of the people around us. Having the wisdom and like a philosophical, like stoic approach, having the wisdom to understand what's appropriate at what time.
Yeah,
that's cool.
The way that he speaks and the way that he's created community is really next level. And what he's done is he's taken this idea of guys who are in that space in their life where they feel like there's something missing, there's something more, and they need not only the physical challenges, they need to be held accountable. They need to find their tribe, their group. I've interviewed two guys that have been in the program, and one is one of the facilitators. His name is Aaron Alejandrino, and on Instagram he goes by the Fit Beard is his Instagram handle, and the dude is just jacked. I mean, he is yoked and a great dude, and he talks really openly about his own background and his history. And another guy's name is Kevin Demmons, who went through the program as well. He's a former Army Ranger, and then came out of it and went through some post-traumatic stress disorder situations, and then went through the program. So I've seen it firsthand in guys that I've connected with, how Bedros has really impacted what they're doing with that idea that you just mentioned.
That's freaking sweet, dude. So there's a solid chunk of things to go with on that one. Holy smokes. I think something that'd be kind of neat to chat about would be the balance between strength and vulnerability, because I think that there is a solid. I don't think that there is ever an absolute of anything. I think that there is a spectrum of most things unless it is absolutely like fact rather than believed truth. It is fact that there is a dichotomy, like how there's a big and there's a small, right? Uh, and then there's like two extremes, and then there's like the little bits in between. And I think that people kind of view things too much from an eye of absolutes rather than seeing the spectrum and just understanding the wisdom of when it's appropriate to be strong, when it's appropriate to be vulnerable. And oftentimes I think like a healthy combination of the two is presence. Is when you're strong and vulnerable is when you're the most present. And there's nothing outside of it, outside of that presence. But yeah, would you be able to riff on that a little bit?
Yeah, I like that. I like the idea of presence in your definition of that, Kyle. And it's interesting growing up, and I could get into the history of building men, like where the seed was initially planted for me. But growing up, my father was more of the, you know, feelings are for pussies, suck it up, man up. And there is a piece like, all right, you need to be able to deal with difficult situations, right? But it was done in a very shameful way, and it was communicated in a very shameful way to me. And he was a really hard worker, really didn't get to know him all that well. Even to this day, he's 71 years old now. I haven't really had a very deep emotional conversation with my father. And he was the provider of the family without a doubt, but it was what he believed in was, and it was basically like one of the mantras with building men. What he believed was, men, they needed to be like physically more dominant, so like athletic conquest or athletic dominance, right? So like you had to be the biggest, the fastest, the strongest. You had to be like, the best athlete, six pack, jacked kind of guy. You had to bang the most girls or the hottest girls. So to him, that was a thing that we heard stories about all the girls that he was with. When I was younger, and what the hell was he doing telling me about that stuff? Like how hot the girls were that he was with when he was in high school and beyond. And then how much money are you making? So financial success. It was athletic dominance, sexual conquest, financial success. So that was what guided my upbringing, was my old man telling me that these things existed. So he was on one side of the spectrum where it was, he would come home from a hard day's work. He would take a shower, take a nap, go to the gym, either go out to the bar, the strip club, or whatever afterwards, come home, where's my dinner, bitch? Then go to bed and wash, rinse, repeat. So it wasn't like if the kids were like making a ruckus, we got in trouble, like leave him alone. It's his time to be quiet or whatever. And that's how I saw like strength, growing up. Like that was what my role model was. So there's that end of the spectrum where it was like all the way to one side where you're like this, like there was like toxicity with it, all the way to the other side. And I feel like we have gotten to this point frequently, Kyle, is or in recent years, is you mentioned in the beginning, you're like this balance of like, pragmatism and woo woo, right? And I think we've gone really far in the woo woo direction where men are afraid to be men. Men are, they're apologizing because they were born with a penis. It's so much to one side where everyone has to hold each other, and we need to sit around and chant in circles, and we need to walk around behind our woman and hold a dog with a purple sweater in their purse, and I don't think that's good either. So how do we get in that middle space, is like, be strong but also be vulnerable with the things that you're going through. And I mean, I'm on the journey, and the pendulum, will toggle back and forth between the two. There are some times when I need to like step up a little bit more into it, and other times I need to like calm myself down and be more present in my like emotional side as well. It's a constant journey for all of us, I believe, and I think that's why it's so important, when we're able to get to young men at that, really transitional space in their life, in that middle and high school age range, where they're starting to develop their identity and what does it mean to be a man, and to not apologize for being a man. So long-winded way of saying, like, it's a really part of how I operate, is being cognizant of the balance between those two.
I think that's pretty cool. It's kind of like, I kind of, the book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of, I wouldn't say, I wouldn't, not like with my immediate, kind of, uh, immediate father. So I had a biological dad, obviously I'm here. And then he passed away when I was 9. So I didn't have a lot of time with him, but he wasn't, I don't, to my recollection, he was not the kind of toxic end of it, but he was definitely his own man's man kind of thing, which is totally cool too, because he was still, he was well appreciated in like in a manner where he was a good individual and doing good for the area. So then he kicked the bucket around 9. And then my stepdad came into my life as well. And then I was able to have like 2 different kind of thought patterns. And I definitely learned much more of the stoic side of things. My stepdad's Dutch, and there's a lot of stoic Dutch people, man. It's crazy. And so I was able to have like a really cool, cool like vibe. But then I also recognize where, when I think of myself, I have this theory. I have this theory where until the day we choose otherwise, like consciously choose otherwise, we will show up for our inner child the way that our parents or our father showed up for us. And I had someone say, well, what if there was no parent there? And my response is, then we neglect the inner child. And until we make that conscious effort to show up as the role model for that inner incarnation of us, uh, then it's just going to be loosey goosey kind of thing. And when I kind of came to this kind of thought process through the World's Toughest Mudder, that was kind of like one of the realizations where I thought to myself, oh, I need to show up for myself as the person I wish, or as the person I wish I had as a role model to tell me what to do in this time of my life. And so what I found with that, there's a spectrum where it's like the internal dialogue of rich dad, poor dad. It's the dichotomy of strong dad, weak dad, or something along those lines, where it's just recognizing what kind of combines with two, like those two, and then trying to find that sweet spot in the middle in my mind. And when we become conscious of how we want to show up for, and I think each year is another incarnation of us. So I may say inner child, but I also consider inner child to be 0 until 9, for example. And when I became more aware of that, then I started becoming more of a leader internally just by happenstance. And what I found is I had that a sweet spot between that vulnerability, because you have to be vulnerable to go inwards. You have to have compassion. And I had this thought the other day where you can't be compassionate and judgmental at the same time. You can only be one or the other at any period of time. So I just chose to be compassionate rather than choosing to judge my internal dialogue, or judge my thoughts, or judge myself, which I believe shame would be a component of that as well.
Oh, and shame is such a powerful word too, right? And you
Totally.
mentioned something interesting, Kyle, when you were talking about strength. I think it's important for young men, especially, to verbalize what that word means,
Agreed.
because kids growing up, when you talk to them about, tell me about strength, it's 100% physical. The way that kids are programmed, that they're thinking it's 100% physical. And I challenge young men that I work with, like, let's redefine what strength means, right? So someone who benches 350 pounds, right, that they're physically strong. And that same man that benches 350 pounds, if he sees someone on the side of the road broken down and like upset, does that person have the strength to be able to sit with someone side by side and say, I am here for you, I can understand what you're going through? Or be able to say, when someone needs, that compassionate shoulder to cry on, to be able to say, listen, I'm here for you, I have gone through something similar, I have tried and I have failed several times in my life, and it made me better in X, Y, and Z. So it's always an interesting thing when I talk to boys about, tell me about strength. What does that actually mean to you? To have them come up with the idea that there is so much more than just physical strength. It's the strength of character. It's strength, to be able to share those difficult things, and we all have them, right? And that's what, I heard it a couple times. You can impress with your successes, but you connect through your struggles. And
I like
that has
that.
certainly, rang true in my own life, and it's, resonated with me on a deep level, and I believe it to be true.
I really like that. Can you say that one more time? I didn't.
So you impress with your success, but you connect through your struggle,
Mm.
or some iteration thereof. I had a guy on my podcast, his name is Jordan Montgomery, and he's a motivational speaker, really, really impressive man. And that was something that he had mentioned, and I connected with that, and I've used it several times just in my own conversations.
Yeah, I think that's really cool. The way I would go about that, because you just asked that question. So I started pondering what I would define strength as. And I think something that's really important whenever I kind of like have an internal dialogue, I try to challenge my thoughts rather than confirm my thoughts. I think when we confirm our thoughts too quickly, then it doesn't give us enough time to go into our actual conscious thinking. I think that's our human being when we're consciously intentional in thinking, while our animal being is the instinctual process or fight, flight, feed, fornicate.
Mm-hmm.
and and I think that second level of thinking, when we challenge our thoughts rather than confirm our thoughts with that thinking, it's well, it makes it a lot more fun. It makes it a lot more fun to figure out where things are. But with strength, I would definitely say that there is the objective strength where the fella is like lifting 350 pounds. That's like objective strength. It's like, oh shit, that guy's lifting more weight
Mm-hmm.
each time. And I think the subjective strength is where the character comes in, the character development, the self-actualization, the consciously competent comes in. And if I were to come up with a subjective strength of the conscious mind, I would say that I think a word that popped up when you said it was dependable. I think dependable was kind of on repeat there, where there's a whole bunch of other words that are kind of popping up. But I think strength is the ability and willingness and desire to be dependable and trustworthy.
And there is a piece that I like that, Kyle, and there is a piece to that, and around like physicality, right? So if you're using dependable as part of it, if you see two guys and one guy's in really, really good shape and the other guy's a total mess, right? You're going to make a snap judgment on someone. But here's the thing, I think a big piece of it is, if you let yourself go and you don't take care of your physical fitness and your health, you're not like able to depend on yourself then. And if you're
Mm-hmm.
not able to depend on yourself and make those promises and keep them to yourself, how are you going to show up for other people? So I do think that that's a part of it. Not that you should, like, it's the be all end all, right? And the guy who has a six pack and can bench all that weight should be seen as a better man. But there is a piece, you need to be able to be disciplined enough to not have a McDonald's cheeseburger every single night and be drinking a six pack every single night, because if you're doing that, you're breaking those promises to yourself.
100%. I completely agree with that. And I talked to uh, whoever's around me really about just keeping those promises. And when we're perpetuating pain, it's because we're progressively preventing ourselves from keeping promises to ourselves. I love that you said that. And I definitely think that how we treat ourselves internally is going to be the perception that we have externally. So our perceptions of the world are reflections of ourselves, in my mind. And the the society that we see is a mirror of what we may not consciously be aware of ourselves in that
Yeah.
weird kind of sense. But I love it when I love that it goes into a balance of internal and external as well. And what I was saying earlier about showing up for your inner child, I think showing up as the person in the present is the prime person. So this would be prime Kyle. And then there's the inner role model and then the inner rival. And when we have strength to listen to that inner role model, and my inner role model is called the Dapper Dude. So I have a name with this character. And when I keep my promises to that role model, who is the person that I aspire to be, life becomes so much more simpler because there's more alignment. When I partake in the whispers of the inner rival, the person that's not so keen on my internal development and is a little bit more impulsive, I would say the animal being rather than the human being. The human being is just that next level up. Then I just lose that trust. I lose that ability to depend on myself, and it's a choice. And it's just each opportunity in each moment is each opportunity and each decision is the opportunity to change the trajectory of the outcome of your life. And I think those little things, man, those little things add up real quick.
And it goes into a piece around my work in education, and I was in education formally for more than 20 years. Most of them were spent as a middle school principal. And one thing that I've recognized is that kids have 5 developmental needs, and pretty much all human beings do, but they are the need for autonomy, to feel like your voice is a part of the space, the need for competence, to feel like you are good at doing things, that builds confidence, the need for fun. And listen, kids are going to have that need met for fun in one way, shape, or form. It's up to us as the adults to have that. Is there a way that we can help them find that need and meet that in a productive way? The need for relationships. And when you're speaking about kids, the idea of the looking glass self, it's not how they see themselves in the mirror, it's how they think others see them, right? So that's how they judge their own self. But the base of all of it is the idea of safety. And when kids don't feel safe, they're unable to truly access learning. So you mentioned that animal brain, right? And there's a whole thing about the difference between learning brain and survival brain. And survival brain will always trump learning brain. So if kids are constantly in the you mentioned like fight, flight, freeze, like if you're constantly in that way in your brain, and you're unable to access the learning brain. And it's true with everything. It's like, are you able to dive deep into relationships? Are you able to be fully present in wherever you are in the world? And if you're experiencing challenging situations, either physically or it could be emotionally, when you're trapped in that rival space, you're going to be there until you deal with it. So I tell educators all the time, or I tell parents if I'm working with them, helping them work with their own kids, what's the biggest piece there? And it's a piece of safety. The kids need to feel safe in the part of their environment. Then they can start, truly expanding and like pressing on the edges of what they thought was possible before.
I really like that. I really like that quite a bit. I like that. So it's toning down the fight, flight, freeze to provide enough space for thinking, for clarity. And
I like yeah.
Nice. Because then when we have that time to think, we just reorganize the mess in our minds. And then when we reorganize things, then actually this is a cool way of putting it. And it was if you know Mark, then you probably know Dave Robinson.
Oh man, Dave.
He was
Chopper
on,
Dave. Dude,
yeah.
I've had Dave on a couple times on Building Men. I met
Nice.
him in person last year in Richmond. He's just an unbelievable dude. Love Dave Robinson.
So he was on a podcast as well, and he came up with the best analogy, and it was like the day after he was doing it, but he was helping a friend of his move.
Okay.
So think of a U-Haul truck, right? And we were talking about cognitive clutter, as I like to call it. And he's like, if you think of a U-Haul truck as your mind, you get the big things out of the way, like the beds, the TVs, the shelves, and then all you're left with is just the little things. And then soon enough, the more clutter that you clear out of all these different various sizes, the more space you're going to have to do cartwheels in the U-Haul. So it's kind of like the mind, where when we can decrease the amount of clutter in our U-Haul, then it gives us a space to actually think, rather than just looking at all of this shit and being like, fuck, I have to move all this. It was a
I
really
dig
cool.
that.
I stole it.
He's good at analogies. I had Dave Robinson on twice on the podcast. So Dave Robinson, he was a guest on not only on the podcast a couple times, he was on the foundation, and that's my online group for boys in middle school and in high school. And we meet once every 2 weeks and talk about these like really important character pillars, daily habits. And I do an interview with a guest, and then they take Q&A from the boys. So he was on that, and he just shares these wisdom bombs, and the kids absolutely love them. It's just really powerful stuff. And it made me think of how when I talk to educators about helping kids that have experienced trauma in their life or adverse childhood experiences, you name it, it could be loss of a parent, divorce in a family, it could be an incarcerated family member dealing with, homelessness or hunger, like something that really pervasively impacts a kid. So it's the adult's job to act as mama elephants for the kids. And what I mean by that is that, baby elephants, they want to explore and play and have a good time. But if they're not surrounded by these like strong figures, they're going to get picked off by predators every single time they're out there doing something. So what the mama elephants will do is they create a perimeter around the baby elephants to let them explore and to play and to be kids. So it's our job as adults to recognize that with kids that we're interacting with. And one of the things that I would consider myself is the ability to provide that level of community and safety for boys that are struggling with something. Let them know that they have someone there that can be, someone to co-regulate their emotions with them, not do it for them, but side by side with them, so they can truly explore what it means to be a young man in middle school and in high school and beyond.
I think that's really cool, dude. I think there's a part of me, I'm not sure at what point in this realm, in this timeline, that I will go about doing that, but I always thought it would be really cool. And I think from a perspective of me thinking of how much I would have benefited from something similar to what you're chatting about in that earlier time frame, or at least in the way that we are articulating things. And I think because people are taught what to think rather than how to think. And I think when we learn how to think, we just realize so much more. And I think philosophy ties into that. Like, most of my mental mentors are philosophers, like Miyamoto Musashi from Japan. We got Seneca. Marcus Aurelius is like way up there. I like a whole bunch of Alan Watts, Terence McKenna. A lot of them have a lot of things in common. Mostly like they're just people that want the best for the internal, and then the external world gets to benefit from that. But I always thought it'd be really cool to develop something similar to that, where it's like early 20s or high school, university, and then saying like, these are just things that I wish I knew at this time. And then I just want to teach you. It's your choice to take them as you wish, because you are an autonomous being. And I want to make sure that you do not have to do things that are out of alignment, that you do not value, and that you don't feel obligated to do. You get to choose to do it. And I think that would be a very powerful just thing to be able to say, or to reassure young dudes that are listening to the standards of the other young dudes, which is kind of perpetuating a problem, because then it's not someone who has experience or wisdom from life, but there's also a lot of man children as well that have not developed the things that you're talking about in order to be that parent, in order to be that elephant, in order to be that that structure, that foundation. And what I think, what we were saying before is along the lines of, when we can show up for that person internally, then we can show up for the people out externally as after that point, where I think people want to change the external to make up for the internal. It's like, no. Flip it. Work on the internal, learn and then go from there. But I always thought that would be a really cool idea. I think it'd be really fun.
Oh, absolutely. And here's the thing, like with the kids that I'm seeing right now is when I get these boys together in a group, and it's done virtually right now, they're getting pieces of advice and hearing life lessons from men who have been through it. And the commonality or the common factor is that these guys, it wasn't just that they were born into wealth and everything worked out for them and they are successful now. Every single one of these guys that I'm talking to has gone through a really challenging situation where they were ready to give up, and everything was stacked against them, and they failed and failed and failed and failed, and by their resiliency they were able to eventually find success. And for them to see that and to normalize, and I do think, like, if you're a parent of a kid, especially of a boy, to normalize failures in your life, normalize not only feelings of vulnerability like we talked about before, but don't just tell the story of the time that you knocked down a 3-pointer to win the state championship and the cheerleader ran out and jumped in your arms, because those things happen very infrequently. Talk about the time where you missed a layup and your team lost by 2 points, right? And if you made that layup, your team would have gone into overtime. Or the time where you got pulled over because you were driving like an a-hole, or whatever it is. Like, normalize, because we all have those experiences. And when kids hear that it's not just me that's feeling insecure about this, my old man went through it, my mentor went through that. Now, as they go through these things, they're like, okay, I know this person who I hold in high regard as a role model went through this, this, and this, and they were able to overcome, to persevere. I can do that as well. So just to normalize those feelings when you're talking to young people, young men especially.
I really like that. Normalize fear. Oh, I always remind myself that fear is just an acronym for false evidence appearing real. Yeah. When
And
it
fear
comes,
is a great thing. Here's a like
oh, go for it.
fear is as a motivator. Fear is, there's a reason why you're feeling that emotion. A guy that we had on the foundation, his name is Akshay Nanavati. Highly recommend you check him out. He wrote a book called Fear Vana. And basically the
Oh,
idea
yeah.
is, dude, Akshay he is like one of the most intense human beings I've ever met. And he came on to the foundation for an hour, talked to the boys about his experience as a Marine, as an ultra marathon runner. And right now what he's doing is he's training to become the first human being in the history of our world that we know to traverse the continent of Antarctica on a solo human-powered expedition, 1,700 miles in 110 days, dragging behind him a 400-pound sled, walking 10 hours or 12 hours a day, and it could be conditions up to negative 40 degrees. So this man is preparing for this experience. So he was a guest, and he talks about the combination of fear and nirvana, and how can you make fear your ally rather than your enemy. And if there's a reason why you're feeling the emotion of fear. So when these boys are seeing this guy he is a total badass, plus he's written a book about it, he's a motivational speaker, they're able to ask him questions. Talk about power there, talking to a guy who was suicidal, who was drinking and addicted to drugs, and he overcame all those things. Wow, now you have something. Now you have some kids that are like, we're going through this together. We also, Kyle, put out a challenge to the boys every 2 weeks. We meet every 2 weeks, and there's a challenge for them. The challenge that Akshay put out there to them was sit alone in silence for 30 minutes. No phone, no nothing. Sit in dark 30 minutes and see how that works. My son is 18 years old now. He is a part of this group. And he told me yesterday, he's like, Dad, I did it. I did the challenge, the 30-minute challenge. I said, how was it? He's like, it was crazy. He was like, one of the harder things I've done. And I said, you were just sitting alone for 30 minutes without anything. And he goes, after 3 minutes, I'm like, oh my God, this feels like forever. And he's like, he had a tough time with it. But so this was a challenge this guy put out there to the boys. Nothing crazy. Sit alone for 30 minutes without any level of distraction. Close your eyes and just think. And then after you're done, journal about the process. So my son did it and he told me about the experience. So how powerful is that to go through as a group? So these boys are together as a community going through that. I wish I had something like this, which is one of the reasons why I started building that. I recognize the need for young men to have these type of experiences.
I think that's freaking badass, dude. Yeah, I think that's for I I'm a loss for words, clearly, but I think that is I think that's tremendous. That's the best way of putting it. I think that is tremendous contribution to not just boys, men, but also like the human race. I think that that is tremendous for the soul, right? Because I think that, and I have read Fearvana. I listened to it, and right when you said his name, I was like, why is that so familiar?
Yeah.
And it's so good, and I love the idea of basically these younger folks that are getting the quicker exposure to these people that are doing such crazy things, and not crazy in the sense of like, oh my gosh, that's like death defying, which fair enough. Going across Antarctica, yeah, there's a possibility. But outside of that, being able to hear other people's times of resiliency, but also their times of fear and how they went through that and became better, and I would say evolved from that, they get to see the possibilities so much more. So I'm thinking of it from where where I really started about 5 years ago, where I really started dialing things in. Now I think, holy shit, if that was 5 years ago, imagine like 10 years ago
Right.
when I was 23, or even like I think that where I think of the investment of knowledge bombs that are happening so much earlier than people would happen to fall upon. This is like intentional, and it's absorption, and it's such a crazy kind of, you can almost look at the statistics or the analytics of how much more likely those guys are going to be to crush it in whatever endeavor they choose to pursue. And that's really cool to be able to kind of forecast that thought and see the possibilities of that. So that's freaking
Yeah.
badass, man.
Thank you, dude. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
It's cool. It's such an adventure that I've been on with Building Men over the past. It started in 2005, the initial Building Men group. So you were like 15 years old. You would have been a kid that I would have tagged to be in my group.
Nice.
And to see where it's come since then, it's so rewarding for me, and I find it to be such an honor that I have the ability to connect with young men and to help them through those difficult challenges as a community together.
Absolutely. I find that a lot of coaches have mostly changed their mess into their message.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm kind of curious about what your mess was. How is it your message now? And what was your thought process in overcoming that mess?
Oh, I love it. So I'll take you. I mentioned my father, right? And so a lot of my mess stems from my relationship to my father. My inner
Might be a moment where there is once again.
there you go.
Oh, there we go. All right.
All
I
right,
think
we're
it was,
back.
yeah. I think it was the
All right.
Wi-Fi on your end. It has a little, oh, now it's yellow. Okay, cool. I think you're good.
Let me I'm gonna send a quick message. I'm gonna ask everyone in my household to get off of Wi-Fi.
Nice. Yeah, that's all good.
Um,
I'm gonna keep all this part in the podcast for sure, because I think it's kind of fun just to kind of own the blurps, you know?
yeah. Um,
I also just
all right.
don't want to edit it too much. I like
Yeah,
the
right.
I like this being, or actually no, I'm not gonna take it. I'm not gonna say it from an area of laziness. It's to show that it's okay to have a little tech fuck up
Right.
and to just
It
flow
happens,
with
dude.
it. Yeah.
It's so funny. When I started my own podcast, I remember in the beginning it was so scripted. It felt like someone jammed a broomstick up my ass and I was sitting there just like reading like a robot. And once I recognized, all right, you gotta like loosen up your ass cheeks and just like settle into this conversation, it totally turned around for me. So yeah, I mean, it's part of life. We're
Totally.
all fallible. Things like this happen. We've all been through that situation, right? And so you're like, this never happened to me before. You think about like the first time you say that to a woman, right? It's like, oh my god,
Yeah.
oh, I'm so sorry, it's never happened before. But you mentioned, Kyle, about like what was my mess, and I started to talk about like going back to my relationship with my father, and I said he was my rival. He still is. He's the
Mm,
one that I'm still like working to overcome situations with. So I'll take it back to I was like 11, 12 years old. So just beginning middle school, Central New Jersey, and really good athlete growing up. My father, like a lot of my relationship with him, the good times centered around me doing well in sports, football, basketball, baseball were my three sports. He coached my teams. Baseball was my sport. I wound up playing in high school and then eventually in college. And if I hit a home run in the game or I struck out 12 batters or, made a great play, then I felt the love from him after the game was over. And a lot of his relationship with me was around extrinsic reward. So you hit a home run, I'll give you $100. Or if you do this, the family's going to go out to dinner if we win the game tonight. Like a lot of these things. And then if it didn't, come to fruition, the void that I felt if I didn't live up to what he had expected from me. And then conversely, if I didn't do well in a game, I struck out 3 times, I made a big error, I walked a run in. It was I was like the wrath was unleashed on me on the drive home from the game, especially. So there was a lot of fear associated with my dad. So fast forward to the spring of my 6th grade year, there were a group of boys that I would hang out with frequently. They were 2 years older than me, and we would play sports together in the street, and they were just buddies of mine. And so I made the middle school baseball team, and these 3 boys were cut from the team. And once that happened, I mean, one, I was really proud of myself that I made this team, and I couldn't wait to go home and tell my father about this. And what happened was the boys stopped talking to me. It was Frankie, Louie, and Vinny. Those were the boys and at that time. So Central Jersey, you figure they were real Italian kids.
Yeah.
And then they started like making fun of me, picking on me, and like we'd be on the bus and they would be throwing stuff at me and flicking my ear. And right now I'm a big guy. I'm 6'4", 220, but at the time, I was a little 6th grade kid. And my head was probably the same size when I was 12 as it is now, with the same size teeth. So I had a lot of like physical things that they could really cut me down for. And then it was like in the hallways in school, they would push me to the locker and trip me and hit me. And I was super nervous every day walking through school. So my level of safety was not being met. I didn't feel safe anywhere and didn't tell anyone about it. I wouldn't talk to my father about it, especially because I was really afraid of his reaction. And now fast forward the spring, we get through the baseball season, and now I'm not on the bus on the way home from school because I'm at practice. Every once in a while when I would take the bus home, if I was getting off the bus, they would chase me home, trip me. I got jumped a couple times, like punched and kicked, and I would go home with a black eye or a bloody nose, things like that. And there was one day we were driving home from baseball practice with my dad, and these 3 boys are out in the street. And as we drove past them, they stick up their middle finger and they yell out, "Fuck you," as loud as they could. And my father looks at me, he goes, "What's going on here? I thought you were friends with these boys." And I'm like, "Dad, don't worry about it. Just drive home. No big deal. I don't want to deal with it right now. Just like, let's forget about it." And he's like, "What's going on here?" And I wouldn't talk to him. So he pulls into the driveway, he says, "Wait upstairs for me. I'll be right back." So I'm sitting on my carpet on the floor of my room, and I could still remember kind of like tactile feeling of the carpet like rubbing in my hands, the sweat dripping down my back, and it seemed like he was gone forever. And finally, he walked into my room. He had gone up the street and talked to these 3 boys. Now he's like a 35-year-old man, goes up and talks to these 3 boys, and he looks at me and he goes, "Let's go. I arranged for you to fight Frankie one-on-one." And now that this boy is 2 years older than me, I'm scared to death of him, right? I've been bullied for the last 3 or 4 months of school. And he's like, says it again, "Let's go. I arranged for you to fight Frankie one-on-one. Louie and Vinny are not going to jump in." And now the fight, flight, freeze response, I could not move. I was frozen, stiff as a board, couldn't move. Now I start to shake and cry. And he looks at me and he goes, "They were right. You are a pussy." And he walks out of my room, slams the door, and he doesn't talk to me for like the next month, like just like ghosts me before ghosting was a word. Doesn't even talk to me, like there was no communication whatsoever. And then like 2 minutes later, after he walks out of my room, my mom comes in, and this is like how afraid of him she was. She goes, "You just lost your best friend, your father," and she walks out. So now I'm like getting bullied pervasively for a long period of time. My dad comes in and just calls me a pussy. And my mom comes in and says, "You brought shame to our family by not standing up for your dad's honor," or whatever. And at that time, I started to redefine, like, oh my God, like, I can't believe that this happened. Who am I? I'm this weakling. I'm not courageous. I can't take care of myself. I can't stand up for myself. I'm going to let people down, is this narrative that I'm telling myself for years and years. And so when you talked about using my mess as a message, this was my narrative for a long period of time in my life. And it was one of the reasons why I got into education when I was in college, was I never wanted a kid to experience that. So that's like a backdrop. I never wanted a kid to feel like they didn't have an adult advocate or
Mm-hmm.
role model in the school that would be able to help them through a challenging situation. So I thought one day I'm going to use that story to help motivate kids, not only if they're going through it, but if they're watching it happen. I know there were kids that saw that happening and they were afraid to talk about it, right? So that was one piece that I really felt that mess that I was going through could turn into eventually a message. I didn't know how that would eventually happen. And so when I was in my undergraduate program in college, I was studying education. I had a coordinate major in sociology. And so I was studying the like social group dynamics and how that impacts members of the group and the group itself. Right. So it was really interesting. And I had to do this internship, Kyle, and it was at a place, a halfway home for at-risk boys. And so they were there because the courts were like, you need a place to go to after school that's going to keep you off the streets, because you were either arrested, so you did something to get yourself in trouble with the law, or you were the victim of sexual or physical abuse or neglect. So these boys were in middle school and high school, and they would go to this place after school, and there were, certified therapists and counselors and psychologists that are working with these boys in an individual and group setting. And I'm there as an intern observing this dynamic of what are they using to get through to these boys, and how are they talking to them in an individual way and in a group way as well. And then they hired me as a van driver. So now I'm a college kid. I'm like 21 years old. And after my classes are done, I pick up this big white van, like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and I'm driving around South Jersey picking up these kids who are like, society is saying they're like social degenerates. And so I'm doing this for a couple months, and lo and behold, what started to happen was on the van ride home, the boys started to really open up about stuff that they weren't talking about in the group and individual sessions, because they felt safe on this drive. I built community in this like, crazy van ride that we're taking home. And then they were asking for me to take the long way home. Now they've just been in this space for like 7 hours after school, and they want me to take the long way home so they could dive deep into some of these things that they're talking about. A lot of them have experienced issues with their dad. A lot of them have experienced bullying type situations. And so to normalize those conversations for the boys, they were like, I want more of this. Can I be the last one that gets dropped off this week so you can talk to me about my own stuff that I'm going through? It was then and there that I recognized like this, like while I got into education because of this, this can also have another level. Like, what can I do to help the boys specifically in a school? Because it's so tough for the boys to say, this is what I'm really struggling with. And this is my shit. This is my vulnerability. Don't use this against me. Can you help me overcome it? So that was my mess. And how I turned it into my message.
Dude, I think that's good. I feel like I liked how you're talking about, because I just felt it in my heart as you're talking about. I'm like, oh yeah, that's good stuff. I got a kind of cool little time travel question for you. But the so present day Dennis, how old were you when you experienced
Oh, it's 12. So it's
12?
35 years ago now, almost 35 years.
So let's say present day Dennis goes back to chapter 12, the 12-year-old self, after, like, let's say after your mom said that, you like went for a walk, or he went for a walk, and you
Yeah.
just walked by him. What would that interaction be like? What would you say to him? Help him out? What would you do with that?
I love that question. And so one, just the idea of going for a walk, right? So I'll start there, because as if you're a parent listening to this, or if you're ever in a difficult situation, go for a walk with someone or go for a drive with them. Walk like it's shoulder to shoulder. I just did a thing about this in a newsletter that I put out, is if you're dealing with something challenging, don't go face to face with a kid, especially if they're really dysregulated and they're emotional about something. Kids are less likely to open up and to share when they feel like they are on stage or they're on trial. They're like in the principal's office, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
So kids, when especially boys, when they get emotional, they'll shut down because they don't want you to see them being weak or being vulnerable. So go for a walk. So that's the first thing I would do. I'm seeing little Dennis right there walking down the street. I'm going to walk with him, right? I'm not going to say stop and look at me in the eyes. We're going to go for a walk together. So now whatever we're coming up with, we're both looking at the same vantage point. We're both looking in the same direction. And that's the problem that we're experiencing. So we're not on opposite sides of the problem. We're together looking at the problem. So that's the first thing I would do, is walk with him. The second thing I would tell him is, dude, this is heavy. Like, this is a lot you've gone through here. this is really, really hard for you to carry right now. As a 12-year-old kid, um, this is not something that you should have to carry. But here's the thing, you are carrying it now. So now, what can you do? Right? So, what can you do with this weight that you're carrying? You could either let this define who you are, or you can let this become something that is a source of strength for you moving forward. Then I would say, what do you need from me right now? Do you need me to listen? Do you need me to give you a hug? Do you want to go train MMA? Do you just want to write about it? Like, what is it that I can do for you right now? And you might not know. Right now, you might not have any idea. Um, and then I would tell them everything that you're feeling right now is is going to eventually help people in the future. So all of the challenges that you've experienced recently, and especially just right now, this is going to be a source of motivation to help other people who are going through something challenging. So while you don't deserve this, use this as a source of strength that you will be able to change someone else's life in the future.
Nice. Yeah, I can kind of imagine like whatever 12-year-old Dennis would look like, and then him being like, "Oh, how do you know?" Then you're
Right.
just like, "Just trust me, bro.
Yeah.
Just trust me." Yeah. Yeah, that's good, man. I think that's really cool. That's really cool. Have you done, I imagine you've probably had conversations with a couple of younger Dennises in your time, hey?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, a couple of the kids that I'm coaching right now are going through something challenging with their dads. We all have we all have something with our dad, right? We all have, there's something there. We have to feel like you either have to prove yourself to him, you have to live up to something, you have to overcome something. And it's like a lot of us are either, or there's a combination thereof of I want to be like my dad in this way, and I do not want to do what my dad did here. Like that all those two wolves exist inside every single one of us, right? And that's a conversation that I do have quite frequently. And there's times where I need to serve as that father figure to boys who they have an absent father. And when I actually started building men in 2005, actually in a school, right? So I was a teacher for a couple years. Funny, my thinking about safety in school, my third day teaching ever was 9/11 in central New Jersey. And so think about, like you could see the smoke from the World Trade Center from my school. And, I had several kids in my school that were impacted, like lost family members in that. So I was like, wow, really need to understand how I can help make these kids feel safe in this environment here. Right. That trumps everything else. And I use that really as the backdrop, and got my master's degree quickly in educational leadership. And I started as an assistant principal in 2005. And once I started there, a lot of the boys in the school, they didn't have an adult male role model. And all the issues that I was dealing with in the school were with the boys. They were coming to school late, not coming to school, getting into fights, getting thrown out of class. They had failing grades. They were getting classified into special services way more than the girls. And so I decided to start a boys group, right? And so this is October of 2005. And I called the group Building Men, and I had almost all the boys in the school join up for this program and set it up. We would sit, I had maybe 10 groups of 20, 25 boys, set it up in a circle, hour before school, and we would look each other in the eye. We would shake hands with every other young man that was there. Shaking hands like you're going on a job interview or you're meeting your girlfriend's father for the first time, right? And so we would talk about that. And there would be like a lesson for the day, and it was about accountability, authenticity, commitment, confidence, courage, humility, integrity, self-discipline. And I would bring in different speakers. I would bring in different video clips. It could be like, I don't know, like Jimmy Valvano's SB speech from 1993. It was just a really powerful speech. And I'd bring in poetry like The Man in the Glass or the poem If by Rudyard Kipling, and we would talk about the message behind it. And when I first started the group, Kyle asked the boys, like, what is a man? Build a man for me. What is a man? And it goes all the way back to our initial discussion point. It was like what my father was telling me through his actions and his words were, you have to be the best athlete, you have to bang the most girls and make the most money. That's what they believed a man was in this group. And I would say a lot of kids that are growing up right now, what their influences are in social media and things that they're watching and they're seeing, a lot of them would say you got to be the best athlete, you got to be with the most girls, and you got to have the stuff. Like that's like what kids are being taught right now. And I'm like, every single one of those things can potentially be taken away from you. So why don't we base our masculinity about things around things that no one can take? What if it's about
Mm.
service to other people? What if it's about self-discipline? What if it's about your integrity? If it's about resiliency, what if it's about those things, and the combination of strength and vulnerability? What if that's what masculinity means to you? No one could take those things away, right? If you lose your job, I can still be someone who's in service to others. If all of a sudden I get hurt and I can't bench anymore, I can still live with integrity. I could still be humble. I could still be a leader, right? And so all of a sudden this group started to understand the importance of the community, and they started to lean into conversations. And then they're like, you know what, I don't need to be acting like a jackass in class anymore, right? I don't need to be fighting in the hallways. I need to show up. If my job is to be here in school, then I'm going to get here early instead of rolling in 20 minutes late, because I owe that to myself and to others who are counting on me. And 1 year after doing that program, like I saw that these staggering results. Normally that school, over the course of many, many years, we were suspending about 100 kids. And after a year of this program, it was down to like 25 kids. It was like a 75% reduction in the number of suspensions in a year. And
Holy.
the boys' grades started to raise too. And we weren't sending as many kids out or classifying as many kids. And it was just like the staggering thing that I saw. And I decided, I was like, this is going to be my path. I don't know how right now. I didn't see the end of the roadmap, right? It was folded up for me at the time. I really didn't see where it was going to go, but I knew in some capacity I was going to use all the stuff that I'd gone through, my experiences, to help build something that would help young men in the future.
I like that, dude. That's freaking sweet. 75% reduction. Hey, that's crazy.
Wild,
That's
right?
huge.
Yep, absolutely crazy. And I saw similar results. I was a principal in 2 other school districts, and I saw something similar. And it's funny, I'm still in contact with a lot of the boys from that first group, and they are your age
Mm,
right now, right? So
nice.
I live in central New Jersey. They just did a big fireworks celebration, and I ran into a couple of the boys that were in that original group. They came up to me, they hugged me, shake my hand, they introduced me to their families right now, and they're like, I still remember what we talked about in Building Men when I was in 7th grade. And so the lessons weren't, and that's like, twice their lifetime ago. It was, they were 13 and now they're 32 years old or something like that. So I know it didn't just have a difference like that year. It had a difference in who they were and how they showed up for other people in the future.
Yeah. So knowing that moment where one of those kids come up and shakes your hand, gives you a hug, and tells you the impact, what's that feeling? What do you have as a physiological response, or what is your immediate kind of thoughts?
It's I'm an emotional person, as you could tell. I was telling the story about my father. I got choked up during that experience, right? I feel the same thing, but in the other direction with that. Like the amount
Mm.
of like overwhelming pride that I can feel, knowing that it might have been one quick conversation I had with a kid, right? One throwaway moment for me might have had a lasting impact for that one kid. So for me to see them take a message perhaps that I had taught them, or we had discussed something even 17, 18 years ago, and now they're putting that into action in their life, it's a very humbling experience for me. And so like honestly, when I speak to these kids, when I talk to those kids, like I get a little bit choked up. Like my eyes well up a little bit with like this overwhelming feel, like wow, this is something. Like it's like that ripple effect. Like not only did it impact this kid, it could impact his kids or other people that he has had conversations with, right? So if you're ever in a moment where you have the ability, especially with a young person, to pour into them a little bit and to invest in them a little bit, that conversation, which might be a throwaway moment for you just in the coffee shop or wherever at the gym, doing that conversation you have with that kid could have a huge impact on the trajectory of their life and other people that they come into contact with.
That's freaking cool, man. Yeah, I like that. I like that a ton. Damn. What have you found to be? So this is going to be like super, super general question. I think it'd be kind of a cool tactical question. What do you think is a common denominator where a common denominator that could shift perspective, or that what is a common denominator that you frequently provide as advice that a majority of individuals or a majority of the men or the boys can apply today?
It's recognizing the three-headed monster that is preventing them from success. And so the three-headed monster that I talked to the boys about, the first is resistance. It's being afraid of doing the hard thing, of, and it could be the fear of failure. It could be just not wanting to do that hard thing that's in front of you. So resistance is the first piece of the three-headed monster. The second piece is distraction. And right now they're carrying around a supercomputer that is just rewiring their brain to need it from the dopamine hits on a constant basis, and they are a slave to it. So the challenge from the foundation of 30 minutes sitting alone, like that's trying to fight that monster of distraction. And distraction for boys right now, it's video games, it's Instagram, it's TikTok, it's Snapchat, it's pornography. And here's the thing too, like, if you're the parent of a kid, your kid's looking at pornography. If they have a phone, they're looking at it, right? And so, for us as parents to take our heads out of the sand and recognize we need to start having conversations with kids at a little bit earlier than we even thought. And while it's uncomfortable for us, if we're not talking to them about it, they're getting their knowledge of all this stuff from Pornhub. So start having those conversations sooner rather than later. So distraction is the second head of the three-headed monster, and the third, which I do believe is the most dangerous of all of them, and it's victimhood. It is blaming other people for things that are going on in your life. And here's the thing too, like, so for me, my dad, I tell the story about my dad. So I can live in the space where, should I have gone through that as a 12-year-old? Absolutely not. Like, no kid should have to go through that. And that's not to compare that my situation or trauma is any worse or less than anyone else, but that was the thing that I went through. So recognizing that that was not something that I should have gone through. Okay, that's not my fault, but it is my responsibility 100% to deal with that, right? And if I don't deal with it, that's going to perpetuate itself in different, it's going to come out in really negative ways, how I'm speaking to myself and how I'm showing up in relationships in my life. And I look at it as a third step, is now it's my privilege. It's my privilege to have gone through that right now. I wouldn't change anything about that situation. I wouldn't change one thing about that situation when I was younger. And kids hear that today. They're like, what? That's crazy. I'm like, well, if that was different for me, I wouldn't be here today talking to you. And so once we can get out of that victim mindset, and for kids, it's, well, the teacher did this, or the coach said I couldn't do this, or it's Billy's fault, or my dad did. Well, if you're constantly blaming other people, you're rendering yourself powerless in future situations. So we need to step into the space where we say, okay, it's not my fault, but it's my responsibility, and now it's my privilege. So I would say that that's the thing as far as like piece of advice. It's like looking at that three-headed monster in the face, recognizing what is the one that you're dealing with more, that's more pervasive in your life. And it might be all three equally. But I guarantee you, if your kid is struggling, if there's a young man struggling, it's one or more of those three things in the three-headed monster.
Yeah, that's a fantastic piece of advice, dude. I like the three-headed monster kind of idea. When I think of the internal monsters, I like how you have them titled, where it was distraction, it was resistance, and then the last one, what was the third one? Distraction,
Victimhood.
resistance, victimhood. Oh my gosh, how could I forget that one? Jeez. I think something is really powerful when we can basically name it. I think of the not Insidious, but it's the different scary movies. I forget what it was. But there's Valak. Valak is like the nurse ghost, the nurse demon, and the main character had to learn the name of the demon in order to have power over it. And so she was like looking, and then she was like, what's the name of this demon? Found the name of the demon, then was able to say Valak, blah, 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 and then was able to face that demon rather than continuously run away from the demon. And I think by having that three-headed monster and also having monster in the title of that, puts a lot of clarity into being able to categorize what the different activities are or the different perceptions. And I think that with naming, that creates so much more power over it.
100% agree with that. And it's like Harry Potter. It's like they were calling Voldemort he who shall not be named, or you know who. And finally, like, he still wants to kill us anyway. We might as well call him by his name. It's Voldemort. Like, let's take away the power of that name. And it's the same thing, whatever it is in your life that you're struggling with. If you're constantly turning your head and running away from it, it's going to grow and that monster is going to get bigger and bigger. So what can you do to look at it in its face and call it by its name and say, okay, let's make a plan of action here to combat whatever this is in front of me?
Absolutely. Dude, yeah, there's like, you absolutely crushed a lot of stuff. That whole, like, how I said to you before, whereas the head, the heart, and the gut intuition, that whole like freaking last 5 minutes has just been freaking knowledge bomb on knowledge bomb. That is so awesome. So in saying that, is there anything that has to be said that hasn't been said?
I all right, so I'll one thing that I recently kind of came across is there was a TEDx talk, and the guy who did the TEDx talk was speaking about, he was like a famous YouTube guy, and he was like into coding or something like that. He has like millions of followers, and he put something out there, and he basically said, I'm looking for 50,000 people that are interested in learning how to code. And if you sign up, I'm looking for 50,000. You sign up, like whatever the bonus that you get on my special YouTube channel, whatever it was. So he had 50,000 people sign up. And so he told them, what you're going to do is follow a couple steps. I want you to be able to code to move like a digital truck through a maze. And and basically told them you start off with 200 points to be able to do this, right? Totally random, doesn't mean anything. And the study wasn't about was the group able to code. What he did was he made two different groups. Group A, 25,000 people. Group B had 25,000 people. And Group A, what he told that group was, if they made a mistake in their coding, there was something that popped up on the screen and said, that's wrong. You lose 5 points. Group B, 25,000 people. If they made a mistake, something popped up on the screen that said, that's not right. Please try again. That was the only difference. So that's wrong. You lose 5 points, and that's not right. Please try again. So the only difference was a little bit in the way it was phrased, and like the idea, like I did something wrong here, and there's now a negative impact to that. So I lose 5 points. The points meant nothing in the scheme of the world. It really didn't mean anything. So an interesting thing happened, and it was statistically significant. So after 50,000 trials, the group that had said that's wrong, you lose 5 points, the percentage of people that got the whole thing right was 52%. But the interesting thing was that group, they only tried an average of 5 more times to be able to complete it, right? So 52% got it right. They tried an average of 5 more times. The group that had said that's not correct, please try again, 68% got it right. So 16 or 17% more, whatever it was, but they tried an average of 12 more times. So more
Almost
than double the amount of times with that many people trying it. There's something to the idea of failure, right? And so if I'm giving a piece of advice, especially from a parent out there, normalize your kids trying things and failing at them. So talk to your kids about what can you do today to fail? Like, if you want to try to juggle, you're going to drop those damn balls 100,000 times until you get it right. If you're trying to hit a line drive to the right side, if you're trying to throw a curveball, if you're trying to throw a spiral, if you're trying to make a jump shot, whatever it is that you're trying to do, normalize the idea of failing. So that the TEDx talk was called the Super Mario effect. And so if you've ever played the video game Super Mario Brothers, right? As you were going through and you're Mario, and all of a sudden the turtle hits into you, and you shrink down. Like, all right, I learned that if I do something there and I do something a little bit differently, I'll be able to jump over the turtle. And then maybe I'll get a little bit further and, oh, I just fell off a cliff or whatever it was as I'm trying to save Princess Peach from Bowser. What happens there is you're not like, oh, I just got killed by this turtle here. I'm done. I'm out. You're like, I learned how to do something on level 3 too by learning that thing that I just got wrong there. I'm going to be better and not do that same thing next time. And I'm going to learn a little bit different way to try it. So now I'm going to get to level 3 and I'll fail a little bit, and then I'll learn how to get to level 3 4. And all of a sudden you're building this level of resiliency where you're now able to tackle bigger challenges. So if you're, as a parent, when kids are at a young age, start normalizing failure, don't put this thing on like, oh, you didn't do well in school, or you missed the ball. Like, let's do it again. You missed the ball. All right, we got this. Like, you can do this again. We're going to keep doing it, and we're going to keep doing it. Like, that's such a powerful thing. And when kids do something, and I'm like a brain nerd right now, especially at a young age, when kids do something that they perceive to be hard or challenging, and they're able to see that hard thing through to fruition and find success at the end through trials and trials and trials of failure, it develops this pathway in their brain. It's like a train track where the next time they do something hard, they're more likely to keep going until they get it. Conversely, if kids try something hard and they give up on it, and they're like, I'm not able to do that, that's too hard for me, it develops this break in the train track to where next time they're not going to try something that's hard. So you think about a kid when they're first learning how to walk, right? A kid stands up and they take like a half a step and they fall. And then they get up and they take another half of a step and they fall. And all of a sudden they take 2 steps and they hit into the wall. And then this happens and that happens. If we treat like teenage kids the way that we would treat toddlers, no one would walk. Everyone would be crawling around, because we're like, oh, you almost got it. You could do this. You could do this. And all of a sudden the kid develops this level of resiliency, and it develops this neural pathway in their brain that they are able to do something challenging. What we do is we stop kids from doing that the older they get. And a lot of it is our shit, putting on this like preconceived notions of what we believe success is. And there's a finite difference between the success and the failure. So enable kids in a safe space to be able to fail forward, fail successfully. Every single failure is a step closer to their final success.
That's awesome, dude. And it's kind of interesting how you mentioned how we treat toddlers learning compared to like teens, kids, or even adults learning. Is whenever you watch someone, people assist a toddler in learning how to walk. They immediately, if the kid falls down, whoever picks them up and is like, let's try again. And it's on repeat. Whereas it's always that positive intent and that positive reinforcement. It's like, you can walk. And we just need to tell each other that we can walk a little bit more often.
Absolutely. And imagine if we set up this thing where we know that kid's going to be able to walk eventually. We know that in our minds and our heart, like everything tells us that this kid will eventually walk. So in our minds, we're not like, well, what if they can't do it? They're going to be able to do it. A lot of it will fall on us, as helping them get through it. Imagine if your kid is trying to learn how to do a card trick. If we set up the stage where we know they're going to be able to do this, I know, like if I help my kid enough, they're going to be able to make a free throw on the basketball court. Instead of them missing 10 in a row, like, all right, maybe basketball's not for you. That's not your sport. Well, what if I treat it as I'm treating a toddler walking for the first time? I know they're going to eventually be able to make the free throw. It's a lot of it is going to be the work. How am I motivating the kid? There's a lot there. So as parents, what can you do to reframe your sense of what failure actually means? So reframe the idea of fear and reframe the idea of failure. They're both really positive things for us to look to for motivation.
Nice. Dude, yeah, man, I'm so pumped to have you here right now. So good. You got some good messages, man. You got some good vibes. Like, I appreciate like your sharing your stories. I appreciate the contribution that you're making to the human race. I think that you got some good shit, dude. It's awesome.
Thank you, man. No, I appreciate it.
Sweet. So, final 2 questions for you, my friend. So the first one is pretty simple. I'm sure anyone that's really self-reflected much has reflected on this one. But setting the scene, you're at the end of your days. Ooh, I can make it sound really good though.
Yeah.
You're at the end of your days. You are on your deathbed, however you envision that room to be. But one thing is for certain, that all those boys that you positively impacted in your lifetime are going to be around you there. And the people that you care for and family and stuff too. Everyone else is just there too. you have one more piece of advice that you can pass on. None of your content exists. Keep that in mind as well. You have one more piece of advice that you can pass on to the people around you. What is that piece of advice?
As a middle school principal, I would take the 7th grade kids every year. So kids are 13 years old on a 3-day, 2-night camping trip. And we would go into this like remote area, and it was like a survival course, a confidence course. To me, the thing that I stationed myself at was this gigantic climbing tower. And it was like 65 or 70 feet tall, and the kids were strapped in, to like a belay type system. And a lot of the kids were petrified to get onto this climbing wall. And I would sit my ass there next to them, and some kids would zip up to the top, no big deal. There was a bell on the top that you could ring, but there were other kids that just, I can't do it. I'm afraid of heights. I can't climb. So I would say to them, go one step further than you thought you could go. And they would look at me, and they're like, all right. So they're on the bottom step or whatever. And so they reach up a step, right? So they reach up, they pull themselves up, and so now they're off the ground a little bit. And then they're like, all right, I'm done. I'm like, well, listen, you're here now. Your action dispels overwhelm. You got something. Go a step further than you thought you could go. And they start to get the idea. So now they take another step up, and they reach a little bit higher. And it goes into this idea. One of my like philosophical ideas around education is a theorist. His name is Lev Vygotsky. And his theory is the zone of proximal development. And there's three, it's like a Venn diagram. And on the left side of the Venn diagram is the stuff that's too easy for the kids that they can do. It's not really challenging for them. And on the right-hand side is the things that are way outside of their ability. So it's things that are way too challenging. In the middle exists this sweet spot of the zone of proximal development. It's something that kids need to stretch themselves a little bit higher than they thought that they can go with the support of an adult. That's where learning occurs in the most prolific way. So as I'm sitting there and as I'm on my deathbed, I would tell the people, whatever exists in your mind as this preconceived self-limiting belief, you have the ability to go one step further than you thought you could go. And once you're there, now you have a new baseline. Once you're there, that's as far as you thought you can go. You can go a step further than that. So if I'm able to give a piece of advice to people, anyone who's there listening on my deathbed, it's how I also sign off on every single podcast. Thanks for listening to Building Men. Go one step further than you thought you could go.
Dude, that's fantastic. Next one, the final question is the very best version of you, the best Dennis is sitting right next to you. What piece of advice does that Dennis have for you for this season of your life?
Wow, that's a really good question. So as he's sitting right here, God damn, you're a handsome man. He would say to me,
Nice.
That's me taking care of a younger Dennis too, who always had these self-limiting beliefs about my appearance and things like that. Mm-hmm. He would say to me right now, I mean, after leaving the education world, I was in education for 20 years, and leaving to I mean, one, take a huge risk, and start up a business, like an entrepreneurial business, and recognizing that, without any formal business training, it was trial by fire, trial by error, and, failing and learning and failing and learning over the course of the last couple of years. That every single challenge that you're going through right now, in the growth process of making Building Men a international brand name, all of this is worth it. Every single struggle that you're going through right now is 100% worth it, because the sweat equity that you're putting in now is going to have that ripple effect on future generations to come.
Nice. Dude, your inner role model, Dennis, is pretty wise. Crazy, eh?
Yeah, it's taken some time to help him grow. It's like a lot of watering and sunlight and singing to him.
Nice. Well, folks, that is what I got for you in today's episode. Where can people find you, Dennis?
Dude, thank you, man. I really enjoyed the conversation. It didn't feel like an interview. It felt more like a deep conversation. My website is buildingmen.io, and most active on Instagram. The anyone who's listening right now, if you mention Kyle, if you reach out to me, if you're interested in either one-on-one coaching or the foundation, I'll throw in a 10% discount on both of them. If you're interested in either one, the foundation meets every 2 weeks on Sundays, and it's just a really, really powerful experience for young men. And then I'm also in schools. If you have any connection to a school whatsoever and you want this message to be with the young men in your school, don't hesitate to reach out.
Dude, that's awesome. Well, folks, if you loved today's episode, which I don't know how you couldn't, please do me a favor right now, share it to your Instagram stories and tag me with my handle at DapperDudeKyle along with at building.men. This is one of the ways that we grow. And until next time, keep up the kindness, and I hope your day treats you as good as you look.